The auctioneer said she wasn't worth the dust on his boots, and that was what made Samuel Bogard laugh. He stood at the edge of the slave yard in town, hat tipped back, coat unbuttoned against the Louisiana heat, killing time before his meeting at the bank. He hadn't meant to stay for the wholesale. He just liked the sound of the gavel, the murmur of numbers, the way other men's fortunes rose and fell in a cloud of dust and sweat that wasn't his. Strong field hands had gone first, broad-shouldered boys with backs like plow oxen, then housewomen, good teeth and quick fingers, each paraded and prodded, and finally claimed at prices that made Samuel's jaw tighten, because he knew how much of that money would end up in ledgers like his dot by late afternoon. The crowd thinned. The serious buyers had their receipts in their pockets and their new property shackled to chains or perched on wagon boards. The auctioneer wiped his face with a handkerchief that had long ago given up on being clean, took a swallow from a hidden flask, and called for the last of the stock. A man from a neighboring county let out a girl so small Samuel thought at first she must be younger than she was. She walked with a dragging limp, left ankle turning in. Her hair was cropped ragged, her dress nothing but a gray sack clinging to sharp bones. When she coughed, the sound tore through her ribs and bent her double. Lot 27, the auctioneer announced, voice already bored. Female, no papers, sickly, name given as Mira. Who'll start me at $1? No one answered. The few men still milling around pretended to study the ground or adjust their hats. $1 was too much for a girl who might not see another harvest. 75 cents. The auctioneer tried. 50, gentlemen, she can at least carry water. Ain't none of you Christian enough to keep a child out the potter's field? Samuel smirked. Christian concern was cheap. Coffins were not. The trader at the girl's elbow shifted, annoyed. Just get rid of her, Hal, he muttered. I ain't feeding that cough another week. The auctioneer sighed and rolled his eyes toward the bright, pitiless sky. 20 cents, he said. Just so I don't have to bury her on my own land. I'm begging you. The silence that followed was worse than laughter. Mira stared at the dirt, shoulders trembling. Sweat and dust streaked her face. A thin blue strip of cloth was tied around her wrist. Knotted 3 times, like someone had meant it to stay there forever. Samuel watched her and thought, 10 years ago, I could have sold a half-dead mule for more than that. The idea tickled something mean and restless in him. His meeting with the banker weighed on his mind, notes coming due, cotton prices sagging, the endless scraping to keep his estate looking as rich as people believed it was. Here, at least, there was something he could buy outright, something utterly, pathetically cheap. 10 cents, the auctioneer said at last, tired. That's the lowest I'll go. Less than a cup of coffee in this town. Somebody take the child so I can go home. Samuel laughed short and sharp. A dime, 1 coin. Less than he tipped the bartender that morning. I'll take her, he called. 10 cents, heads turned. The auctioneer peered through the heat. Colonel Bogard, that you? Well, now the Lord surely smiles on the charitable. Charity? Samuel drawled. My wife's always complaining she hasn't enough hands when someone takes fever. If the girl lives, she can mop floors and fetch broth. If she dies, I'm out a dime. That seems fair, a few men chuckled. The trader shoved the girl forward with obvious relief. Samuel flipped his coin toward the block, caught as much by the arc of it as by the way Mira flinched like it might hit her. When she reached him, she kept her eyes on his boots. Up close, he could see the fever brightening her skin, the way her fingers shook. Name? He asked, more from habit than interest. Mira, master, she whispered. You any use at all, Mira? She swallowed, coughed hard enough to make her whole body jolt, then rasped, I can work. I carry water. I don't complain. We'll see about that, he said. He turned away, already bored. Put her on the wagon. The driver lifted her like a bundle of sticks and laid her among sacks of flour and a crate of tools. As the wagon jolted out of town, Mira clutched the blue ribbon on her wrist so tightly her knuckles went white. She had learned by now that people only said your name when they were about to take something from you. No one asked where she came from. No one asked who had tied that ribbon. The road unrolled beneath the wheels, red dust giving way to rutted lanes framed by cypress and live oak. Samuel rode in the carriage ahead, thinking of interest rates and seed prices. of what face he would wear in front of the banker so the man would not smell desperation. The girl behind him was already fading into the blur of his day, just another small calculation. 10 cents for a chance at a little free labor. He never once turned around to see her watching the fields with a look that was half terror, half something like recognition. She had never seen this plantation before. Yet when the house came into view, white columns, wide porch, tall windows staring outward like judgment, something inside her clenched as if a thread she'd been trailing from birth had finally pulled taut. At the big house, a maid ran out to take Samuel's coat, eyes widening when she saw the child struggling down from the wagon. "Lord, what you gone and brought home now, Colonel?" she muttered. "Trouble?" Samuel snorted. "I brought a mop that can cough. Take her to the kitchen. Mistress can do what she likes with her." He stepped past them without a backward glance, boots ringing on the porch. His mind had already jumped ahead to the ledger on his desk, to the polite cruelty of the bank's letters. Behind him, Mira stood in the shadow of the grand house, chest heaving, legs weak. The blue ribbon on her wrist caught a shaft of light and flashed for an instant. The exact color of a dress hanging in an upstairs wardrobe, the favorite gown of Clara Boggart, the mistress of the house, who was at that very moment sitting by an open window, bored eyes drifting over the drive, waiting for something, anything, to change the air in those rooms, thick with silence and unspoken grief. The first time Clara saw the girl's face, she dropped her sewing needle and did not even notice when it stuck in her skin, because in that sick, half-starved child bought for 10 cents, she saw a pair of eyes she had buried in her heart 10 years before. Clara Boggart did not go down to the yard when the carriage wheels crunched on gravel. A lady did not rush to greet her husband like a servant. She sat by the upstairs window with her embroidery, letting the light fall over linen and thread, pretending that the letter she stitched had somewhere to go. Outside, the shrinking line of cane fields shimmered in the heat. Inside, the house felt like a museum of disappointments, empty nursery, unused toys, a cradle in the attic that no one had dared to sell. When the maid's voice floated up, "Master's home, ma'am, and he's brought something," Clara rose more out of habit than curiosity. Samuel returned from town with something, often new tools, a bolt of fabric, sometimes another slave with broad shoulders or quick hands. None of those things ever filled the hollow she carried. In the front hall, she found him shrugging off his coat, dust on his boots, impatience in the set of his jaw. Behind him, half shielded by the doorframe, stood a small girl in a stained gray shift, damp hair clinging to her forehead, shoulders drawn tight like she expected a blow. "Who is this?" Clara asked, because it was easier to address the child than to look Samuel in the face. "Some scrap they couldn't sell." "Mira," Samuel said. "Got her for 10 cents. Thought you might finally have someone to help when fever comes. She's small, but she can carry a basin. 10 cents. Clara's mouth twitched, but she swallowed whatever wanted to come out. "How old are you?" she asked the girl. "Don't rightly know, ma'am," came the thin reply. The girl's eyes stayed fixed on the floorboards. "Look up when the mistress speaks," Samuel snapped. "You'll trip over your own feet, staring at the dust all day." Slowly, like it cost her something, the child lifted her head. The afternoon light from the tall windows caught her face, brushed away shadow, and showed Clara what she had not expected ever to see again. Hazel eyes, not brown, not gray, but that peculiar mix of green and amber that had run through the women in Clara's family, like a curse and a blessing both. Her mother's eyes, always too honest to hide anger. Her grandmother's eyes staring out of a faded portrait over the fireplace at home. Her own eyes, which she avoided in mirrors these days, because they always looked a little too wet, a little too tired. And once, only once, the same eyes had shone from the crumpled face of a newborn lying on bloody sheets, fingers curling weakly round nothing before the midwife had looked at Samuel and his father, and said words that blurred into a roar in Clara's ears. Mixed shame. "We'll take care of it." That night had broken in half in her memory, before and after. Before there had been the pain, the fear, the moment when she had reached out for the tiny bundle and seen the too light skin, and those bright, questioning eyes. After there had been sleep that felt like drowning. Then waking to an empty cradle, and her father-in-law's heavy voice saying, "It was for the best." The child was weak. The Lord took it. "You'll have another." She had not. But the eyes had never left her. They haunted the edges of mirrors, the faces of strangers, the dreams that woke her with tears drying on her cheeks. Now they stared up at her from a sickly slave girl bought for less than the price of a ribbon. Clara's hand jerked. The embroidery needle slid into her palm. She didn't feel the pain, only noticed the bead of blood later when it stained the white linen. "Clara," Samuel's voice sharpened. "What is it?" She realized she'd gone pale, fingers trembling. Carefully, she straightened her shoulders, pulling habit around herself like a cloak. "Nothing," she said. "The heat. The day has been long." Her voice seemed to come from somewhere far away. Her eyes stayed locked on the girl's face, the freckles scattered over Mira's nose, the narrow jaw, the stubborn tilt of her chin. But it was the eyes that made the world tilt. The girl shifted, uneasy under the scrutiny. A small cough rattled in her chest. Around her wrist, a strip of blue cloth hung, a faded, frayed ribbon tied in 3 small, careful knots. Clara's gaze snagged there, too. The color was wrong for most plantation cloth, not the browns and grays slave dresses were cut from. It was the soft sky blue of a good cotton bought in town, of a gown Clara herself had worn a decade ago when she had still believed. Her husband's hand on her waist meant something like affection. That dress had torn the night the baby came. The midwife had cut it. Later, Clara had seen the ruined fabric bundled in a corner, and then never again. No one on this property should be wearing a piece of that dress. "Come," she heard herself say. "The girl needs washing and a clean shift. Hannah, heat water. We can't have her coughing over everything I own." Her words sounded cold in her own ears. But if they shook, no one mentioned it. As she turned away, she caught the quick frown on Samuel's face, the way his eyes flicked from her to the child and back again. If he recognized anything, he hid it. That night, the storm rolled in fast, as if the sky had been waiting for an excuse to break. Rain drummed on the roof overhead and beat against the shutters. The house seemed to draw in its shoulders, everything tighter. In the small washroom off the kitchen, steam rose from the tub where Hannah scrubbed Mira's thin limbs with harsh soap, and rags soft from 100 washings. The girl bit her lip each time the cloth dragged over raw skin, but made no sound. "You keep quiet, don't you?" Hannah muttered, not unkindly. "That'll help some. This house full of folks who don't hear what they don't want to." When she rinsed the girl's wrist, the ribbon slipped loose and floated for a moment before she snatched it back. "Where you get this?" the maid asked, holding the strip up. Mira's eyes followed it, suddenly sharp. "From my first mistress," she rasped. "She tied it on me when I was little. Said so she wouldn't lose me." Hannah's brows rose. "She lost you anyway." Mira looked down. "Some men came one night, took me while she was crying, said it was for the best, said I wasn't supposed to be." Hannah's hand tightened around the ribbon. She had worked in this house long enough to know that some stories were the same, no matter which family name was painted on the gate. She slipped the cloth back onto the girl's wrist and tied it tight. "You hang on to that," she said. "Some things you got to keep, even if other folks pretend they gone." Upstairs, Clara sat in Samuel's study doorway, watching his face as he bent over the ledger, pretending to read numbers he already knew too well. She hadn't meant to come here. Her feet had brought her before her mind had decided. "I need to speak with you about the girl," she said. He didn't look up. "If she's died already, send word to the trader. He owes me a better one. I won't have sick stock on my hands more than I bargained for." "She hasn't died," Clara said. "Hannah says the fever's broken." "That's not my concern." Something in her tone, thin, stretched, finally pulled his eyes from the page. He leaned back, studying her. "Then what is your concern?" She stepped into the room, closed the door behind her with soft, decisive fingers. The lamplight made the lines round his mouth deeper than the last time she'd really looked. "You brought something into this house without knowing what it is," she said. He snorted. "I brought a cheap maid, 10 cents and a little soap, and she might be of some use." "Don't start with notions, Clara. We can't afford them." She ignored the insult. "I want you to see her, really see her, not as a mark in your book. I saw enough at the yard. You saw a limp and a cough." She shot back. "You didn't see her face." The rain hammered harder, like fists on the roof. Samuel sighed. Fine, if it'll keep you from fainting on my floor, we'll fetch her up here. When Hannah brought Mira to the study, the girl's hair was damp, her skin scrubbed almost raw. The borrowed shift hung loose on her thin frame. She hovered at the doorway until Samuel barked, "Come forward." She shuffled into the lamplight. "Eyes down. Look at me," he ordered. She raised her gaze just enough to obey. For a moment, all he saw was a tired, frightened child. Then the lamp flame flared, catching the color in her irises green ringed with amber. The breath caught in his throat. Memory and welcome and sharp shoved its way into his mind. The tiny face on the pillow, his father's shadow filling the doorway, the muttered words about scandal and shame. How easy it had been to nod and let other hands do the dirty work while he wiped his own, and told himself it was mercy. Children favor all sorts of folks, he said too quickly. You see a resemblance, because you want to. I see my own eyes, Clara said, each word a nail driven into wood. I see my mother's eyes, my grandmother's. And I see the ribbon from the dress I wore the night they took my baby away. Mira stood very still, as if noise might make her vanish. She did not understand every word, but she heard baby, took, ribbon. And something in her chest fluttered like a trapped bird. Where were you before the traitor? Samuel demanded, desperate suddenly for some fact that would break the spell. Think, girl. What was the house like? She swallowed. Big master, white columns, long porch. My first mistress wore blue dress a lot. She called me little bird. Then men came at night, took me away in a wagon. She was crying. She tried to hold on, but they said I was a mistake. Clara made a small strangled sound. Samuel closed his eyes for half a second. There were plenty of big houses with white columns, plenty of blue dresses, but the word mistake hung between them like smoke from a fire he had helped start. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Inside, something else broke quieter, but more dangerous. Clara stepped around the desk until she stood beside Mira. Up close. The similarity was even worse, not similarity, continuation. Listen to me, she told the girl softly. Do you remember being sick as a very small child before the men came? Mira frowned, thinking hard. I remember a fever, people talking low, somebody singing, a cold cloth on my head. Then I woke up in a strange place. Men laugh and count coins. Her fingers found the ribbon and worried at the knot. My first mistress. She said she was sorry. Tears stood in Clara's eyes, but her voice stayed steady. I am that woman, she said. Or I was before they took you from me. Mira's mouth opened, closed. She stared between Clara and Samuel like they were figures in some cruel dream. Mistress, she whispered. What you saying? Clara knelt so they were eye level. It was the first time in years she had knelt to anyone. I am saying, she said, each word quiet and viciously clear, that the man who laughed and paid 10 cents for you today is the same man who stood by while they carried you out of my room and told me you were dead. For a long moment after Clara spoke, the only sound in the room was the rain. It drummed on the roof, slid down the glass, hissed in the gutters. Mira stared at the woman kneeling before her, at the man gripping the edge of his desk like it was the only solid thing left in the world. I don't understand, she whispered. You my mistress now. You say you was my mistress before. How can that be? Clara's hands trembled as she reached for the ribbon on the girl's wrist. They told me you died, she said. They said you were too weak to live. Your skin was too light. Your eyes, she swallowed hard. Your eyes made my husband's father furious. He said people would talk. He sent men to take care of it. I was feverish. I could barely lift my head. When I asked where you were, they said, the child is with God. You must let it go. Mira looked down at her own thin arms, at the light brown skin, at the scars of old sickness. I ain't with God, she said softly. I've been in other people's kitchens, in yards, on auction blocks. Her gaze flicked toward Samuel. Men laughed when they counted money over me. Today, you laughed the loudest. The words were simple, but they hit him harder than any blow. He opened his mouth, closed it. Voice stuck somewhere between his chest and his throat. In his memory, that night 10 years ago had blurred into something he could almost forgive himself for. His father's voice, the doctor's mutter, the midwife's hands, a tiny bundle whisked away. Weak, they'd said. Best not to get attached. It had been easy to let their certainty wash over him and call it necessity. He had never pictured where the bundle went. He had never followed the wagon in his mind all the way to some trader's pen until now. "You think I wanted this?" he snapped, but the anger sounded thin even to him. "You think a man chooses to be mocked in his own town because his house isn't like other men's? You think I wanted my father pointing at a child and seeing a ledger full of trouble?" "You did choose," Clara said quietly. "You chose not to stop him. You chose not to look for her. You chose to laugh when you bought her back for 10 cents, as if it were funny that a life could be that cheap." Thunder rolled low overhead like a warning. Mira took a small step back, shoulders pressing against the study wall. Her eyes were dry now, almost too bright. "All I know," she said slowly, "is I've been told my whole life I wasn't supposed to be here. First House said it. Men who took me said it. Trader said it when fever came and I didn't die. Today the man on the block said it when nobody bid on me. Now you say you my mama and you say you my master. Which one is true?" Clara let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "You are my child," she said. "That is true whether this house likes it or not. Whether the law writes it or not." She straightened, turning to Samuel. "What are you going to do?" He rubbed a hand over his face, suddenly looking older than his years. "What would you have me do?" he asked. "March into town. Tell the bank and every man who ever shakes my hand that I have a daughter in my slave quarters. Throw away what little standing I have left. I would have you act like a man instead of a coward hiding behind ledgers," she said. "You love to talk about honor at the table, Samuel. Here it is in front of you. What will you write beside her name?" He glanced at the open ledger, at the neat columns of figures. In the margin beside Mira female, he had scrawled 10C earlier that afternoon with a careless flourish. The ink was barely dry. With a sudden sharp motion, he grabbed the book, dipped his pen, and dragged a line through the number until it was a dark slash. Then, beside her name, he wrote one word, no value. It was not enough. It was everything he could think to do. "She is not to be sold," he said. "Not put against loans, not offered as payment if the bank comes for us. Not while I'm alive. And after?" Clara demanded. "What happens to her when you're gone, and some other man sits at that desk?" He stared at her. The future had always felt like something he could bully into shape with enough work. Now it looked like a long hallway lined with closed doors. "I don't know," he admitted. The truth hung heavy. "I can't set her free easily. You know the law papers, fees, petitions. They'd ask questions. Then we live with danger," Clara said. "We already do. We've lived with the danger of lies for 10 years. I would rather live with the danger of truth." Mira's brow furrowed. "Free," she said. "You would make me free." The word sounded strange in her mouth, like a song she'd only ever heard from a distance. Clara went to her, took her hands. "I don't know yet how," she said honestly. "But I swear to you, I will not stand by again while men decide your fate without seeing your face. Not as long as I can stand myself." Samuel let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "We can't do this alone," he said. "If we send her out with papers tomorrow, someone will snatch her up before she reaches the next county. There are men who make their living hunting girls with faces like hers. There are also people who help them run," Clara replied. "You know it as well as I do. You pretend not to hear the stories whispered in town. The preacher who writes letters. The black carpenter who always seems to need extra hands upriver. We've looked away because their courage made us uncomfortable. Now we have reason not to." Samuel looked from his wife to the girl and back again. For the first time, he saw not just the trouble this would bring, but the possibility of something different, however small. "You'd have me put our necks under the same rope as theirs?" he asked. "I'd have you put your soul where your mouth has always claimed it was," Clara said. "You say the good book matters. You bow your head in church. Then you come home and treat people like entries in your accounts. If you cannot do this for justice, do it for the 10 years she lost because you wouldn't look." Mira listened, heart thudding. The idea of running again scared her as much as it thrilled her. The wagon, the auctions, the hands grabbing had all started with a journey. But staying in a house where the man at the head of the table had once laughed over her like she was nothing felt like standing under a tree in a lightning storm and hoping the sky forgot her. "If I go," she said slowly. I don't come back, do I? Clara's face crumpled, then smoothed again through force of will. Maybe not, she said. If you're lucky, free people don't come back to the places that tried to bury them. But your mama stays, Hannah said from the doorway. None of them had heard her open it. She stood there, a dishcloth in one hand, eyes sharper than anyone gave her credit for. She stays with the man who let you be carried out his door. Stays in a house that might turn on her when you're gone. That's the price of sending you away. Silence settled heavy as wet wool. I know the price, Clara said quietly. I knew it the moment I saw her eyes. There's no choice that doesn't hurt. She turned to Samuel. Decide. Will you keep her here and chain yourself to what you've done? Or will you help us risk something better? He stared at the lamp flame for a long moment. Then he nodded once, as if speaking to himself as much as to them. I know the preacher, he said. The one folks whisper about. He owes me a favor. I can write a letter that says I'm sending him a girl to work in his house. And if anyone asks, she's still mine on paper. He can do what he likes beyond that. And if the bank comes? Hannah asked. They look at the list. They count the heads. Samuel closed the ledger with a snap. Then I tell them she died of fever, he said. The words tasted strange this time. He had thrown them around so easily for years. Now, facing the girl he'd once consigned to that lie, they cut. There'll be a stone in the family plot to prove it if they need proof. Names in books, that's all they ever trust. They never look long enough at faces. A hollow laugh escaped him. Clara's eyes filled again. You would lie for her now, she said, after lying about her before. I would lie to men who wrote laws that made her a thing, he said. I owe her that much if it's worth anything. Mira's hands went to her ribbon, twisting it. So I die here, she said, trying out the idea. But I walk somewhere else. Hannah nodded slowly. Sometimes that's the only way folks like us get to live, she said. Die where they count bodies. Live where they ain't watching so close. The plan took shape over the next days in quiet conversations, in folded notes, in glances passed between people the big house had never bothered to see. Samuel wrote the letter to the preacher with a hand that shook more than he liked. Clara packed a small bundle for Mira's sturdy shoes, a plain dress that wouldn't draw too much attention, a comb, a worn Bible with no name written inside. Hannah pressed a small pouch of dried herbs into her palm. For fever, she said, or making a man sleep if you need him to. Don't use too much. The night before the wagon was due, Samuel walked alone to the family graveyard under the leaning trees. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth. He chose a spot near a row of stones, drove a stake into the ground, and told the caretaking slave to mark it in the morning for a small, unnamed grave. Fever took her, he said. Write that in the quarter. Tell anyone who asks. The man nodded, wary and confused. Fever took people all the time. No one would question one more. On the day Mira left, the sky was heavy, but no rain fell. The wagon that pulled up to the back lane belonged to a man who, on paper, hauled lumber upriver. Inside his chest, he hauled other things, a different kind of courage. He tipped his hat low when he saw Samuel. You sure about this, Colonel? He asked quietly. Ain't no going back from it. Samuel glanced toward the house where a curtain trembled in an upstairs window. He could imagine Clara there watching, holding herself together, because if she didn't, everything might spill. In the yard, Hannah stood close to Mira, one hand on the girl's shoulder. No, he said, but I'm sure about what I did before, and I can't live with only that. Mira climbed into the wagon, clutching her bundle. She looked back once. Her eyes met Clara's through the glass. For a moment, distance fell away. They were just as sets of the same eyes, one older, one younger, both wet. Clara lifted her hand, pressed it to the window. Mira pressed hers to the air. No sound passed between them. The wagon rolled away, wheels creaking, leaving twin tracks in the dirt like lines drawn between lives. In town, Samuel went to the stonemason and ordered a small marker. Name? The man asked. Chisel poised. Samuel hesitated. He saw the ledger in his mind, the empty space where her price had been. The slash through the old number. No name, he said. Just the year. The Lord knows who it's for. The mason shrugged. It was not his business to question how planters mourned. Days later, when the stone went up in the family plot, Samuel stood there alone, hat in his hands. From a distance, it looked like any other grave. To the bank, to the law, to neighbors counting whispers, it said the same thing, a child gone. An entry closed. To him, it said something different. This is where the lie lies now. Not in the girl in me. He bowed his head and, for the first time, prayed not for his crops or his debts, but for a girl on a wagon he might never see again, and for a woman upstairs who had chosen a kind of widowhood while still wearing her husband's name. Somewhere upriver on a rough road lined with trees, Mira, no longer a number, not yet free by any legal measure, leaned against the wagon's side and watched the plantation vanish. Behind a screen of leaves,